In 1996, when JonBenét tragically passed, a couple DNA samples were taken from underneath her fingernails and also some blood stains found in the underwear of JonBenét. And to this day, we don't know what the DNA really means. Is it the thing that can confirm that there was an intruder and who that might be, and finally getting some closure onto this case? Or is this just a red herring and that maybe something a little bit more dark is going on in this case? But in today's video, we'll go through all of the DNA evidence and come to a conclusion by the end of it. Welcome back to the Midnight Report, and like the intro stated, we're going to be looking at the DNA evidence. This is something that I took a little bit of time in my documentary to talk about. I've seen people talk about the DNA evidence in both of my reaction videos to the latest John Ramsey interview. I was going to make a third part to that series, but as I watched the rest of the interview, I just didn't feel like there was a lot to really comment on. And if I'm going to do a reaction to something, I'm going to stop it and pause it a lot. I'm going to talk over it a lot because I don't want to just play somebody else's interview and it's just me just making expressions to it. I don't like that kind of reactionary content. That's stealing, in my opinion. So I didn't feel like it was necessary. There wasn't a lot of information within that back, 30 minutes that I felt like was necessary to talk about. So instead, we're going to talk about the DNA. So let's start in 1996 when JonBenét was found dead and look at the autopsy and some of the early testing on the DNA. So at the autopsy of JonBenét, we know that she was wearing an oversized Bloomingdale's underwear that was size 12, meant for an older cousin. This underwear was very new. It wasn't meant for JonBenét. Like I said, it was oversized. That's going to be a talking point later on in this case, so I just want you to keep that in the back of your mind. There were small blood stains found in the underwear, and there were also samples collected from the underwear and underneath her fingernails, and these would be the prominent DNA samples that would turn into this unidentified male. So those are the important ones. There was more that they tested, but these are the big ones. These are the ones that are huge to this case. The other ones were largely found to just be JonBenét's own DNA. So in the early testing, this is 1997, 1999, the way we're able to test DNA has, of course, gotten better because technology evolves. And so the early testing, there wasn't a whole lot to come from these samples. Is that the Ramseys do not get cleared till 2008. So this early DNA testing didn't really do much for the case in terms of clearing anyone or suggesting anything. But at the time, the technology they were using only gave partial, low-level DNA fragments that were found. But there was no usable full profile. There was no match to John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey, or any of the other Ramseys found, and especially the ones that are important. But the blood did raise a question about possible sexual assault, but findings are a bit ambiguous. And this is the thing that's going to come up is, it seems like there was some sort of disturbance with JonBenét's private area. We don't know if that is related to the intruder. We don't know if that's related to other things going on within the family dynamics. This is largely left up to interpretation, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on as well. But as the years then went by and we got into the early 2000s, the testing got better. Labs developed a foreign male DNA profile from the blood drops in the underwear and from the trace material on the waistband and the leggings. This became known as, well, what we know now as the unknown male DNA. So this is where this came from. And I want to point out, these are partial, low-level, possibly could be mixed, even contaminated. We'll talk about that afterwards when the Ramseys were cleared in 2008, as we're going to start to then look at some of the explanations that people have come to, the conclusions that people have gathered from this, the ones that I buy, ones that I don't really buy all that much. In 2008, Boulder DA Mary Lacey announces the foreign DNA does not match any Ramsey. She apologizes to the family and publicly states the DNA points to an intruder, and from this point, many believe the Ramseys are effectively cleared. This was a big moment in the case. This was before the wave of podcasts and YouTube and before Burke Ramsey's interview. So I think that the interpretation of this case then would be a lot different than the way it is now. Whereas back then, it would be a huge deal. It still is a huge deal, right? It puts the Ramseys out of being the prime suspects in terms of an investigation, even though I think to a lot of people they still are. But a lot of people criticize this. A lot of forensic experts criticize the DA's conclusion. The DA was tiny, low copy, and could be factory contamination from clothing manufacturers. So this is really important to understand because remember, the underwear was pretty much brand new. And so it was something that if you were looking at the DNA that could have been passed from somebody touching this underwear, then it goes in this package, and then goes to JonBenét, there's a possibility because touch DNA can last for quite a good amount of time. This could have been some manufacturer's DNA. And I think this is a key point as we'll kind of go towards my own conclusions, but I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Touch DNA is not something where like, oh, it'll go away in like a day. It's not one of those things where it's like, say, for instance, the pineapple. The pineapple we know had to have been given within a certain amount of time. Touch DNA is much different. Touch DNA could have been days, weeks, before, and that lingers on this. So that's important to understand. It isn't that somebody had to have touched, her underwear, her leggings, whatever, within a certain amount of time. Could that have happened? Yes. Of course that could have happened. If there was an intruder, that definitely could have happened. But if you want to look at the flip side, that also couldn't have happened either. And that's why the DNA is so hard to really evaluate in this case. And one of the other things put forward is that the blood could be JonBenét's. So the blood in her underwear, which I think indicates that it is just based upon the underwear was brand new. And then also the vaginal trauma that it seemed like JonBenét had would indicate that the blood was from her as well. And then that the DNA may or may not be connected to that. So if there was already touch DNA, say on the underwear, and then you had the vaginal trauma, that could all have just happened and be separate whole things. And that's why I talk about the sexual like assault maybe that was going on here could be very unrelated to the DNA finding. And that's a key point. And so this is not me saying this is a forensic expert. This is me looking at other people's interpretations of this. That is what a lot of forensic experts say. Not indicating that the Ramseys are guilty, but just indicating we don't have a concrete opinion or factual basis to say that they are cleared from just because of the DNA. We also know, looking at the fingernails, it suggests that there were multiple contributors, adding more uncertainty. And so another thing that kind of gets overlooked, I think, is when you think about how the police handled the JonBenét Ramsey case, they didn't do the best job. I think that there's a lot of criticism to go around. I don't think they did the worst job in the world, but I think there's a lot of criticism you can put there. And you also think about the way the scene was handled. There was a lot of room for contamination. It's just hard to, when especially the Ramseys, John Ramsey, a lot about that interview in those parts, he tries to put all the blame on the police. And when you do that, you also open the door for, okay, could they have contaminated some of these DNA samples? Like, could they have not, kept them correctly? Could there have been some not great practice going on? They didn't have the biggest experience in these type of cases. All of that is possible. And so that's why so many people that are forensic experts or people that are focused in this field, they're not, pointing straight to the Ramseys and saying they're guilty. They're just pointing to the idea that this is not evidence that's concrete. It's evidence you couldn't really use in court all that well because it's low partial samples with a high risk of contamination. And so I think that's really important. And that isn't to say that if there is an intruder, right, the fingernails are a huge part of it. That kind of leads us then to 2016. Like I talked about, I think there was a gap in this case where it died down for a while and then it picked up a ton as we got into the mid to then late 2010s. And that comes with the 2016 CBS documentary. And it's a documentary that also was a target by the Ramseys in terms of suing for their opinions and things that they put out. But the experts in the 2016 CBS documentary argue that the DNA may not be reliable enough to rule out family involvement. They highlight how new clothing can carry stray DNA from handlers in factories or stores, and that the foreign DNA could still be crucial, or it could be a red herring. And that's the opinion I came to in my video, is that the DNA, I think, is important because it can rule out certain things, or if the intruder theory is correct, it could also possibly lead to the person that did this. So I think the DNA is important, but for different reasons, depending on what you believe happened. And that's the key point of it, is if you believe that the Ramseys are innocent, this DNA could lead to somebody that was there and that may have done this. If you're somebody that believes the Ramseys possibly did it, you can point to the idea that there's multiple reasons that, there could have been touched DNA in all these different places, and there's multiple excuses as to it being innocent ways it could have gotten there. So that's the point of it. And that's kind of what the CBS documentary kind of leans into, the idea that the DNA should not be pointed as the sole clearing or not clearing evidence. And as we now get to then 2022 and even the modern day, the Boulder Police and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation announced they are re-examining the case with modern genealogical techniques like those used in the Golden State Killer case, and as of today, no confirmed matches have been in CODIS or other databases. I don't know if that's how you say it, if it's supposed to be like CODIS or CODIS. I don't know exactly how it's supposed to be pronounced, but more or less, nobody has ever been confirmed that they have a match for this, and that's obviously why I'm making this video. So let's get to the key point of this video. So the first one is the bloodstains in the underwear. They indicate trauma, but also the foreign male DNA inside them could be disputed. Like we've talked about, it has many different innocent ways that it could be there. And one thing I really want to look at, something that like nobody has really done that I think would be really interesting for the DNA side of things, is if we were to track down exactly where this underwear came from, go back to whenever Patsy and John bought this underwear, where exactly did they buy it? Then where did that come from, the exact factory, if this is all possible. I'm not sure if this is possible, but if it is, I think this would be a great avenue for the DNA. And then going to the factory it was made, and then doing a DNA test on those people. And I think this would be something that could possibly find an answer. If we do get a match to a factory worker or something like that, it disproves a lot of the DNA. It could push you towards maybe the idea that it wasn't an intruder if that was the case. But if it doesn't, say that happens, we go to the exact factory, we go to the stores where this was put at, where there would be some DNA if it was touched and they don't match, that could then indicate something else. So that's what I think would be really interesting. I'd love to see that being done, because when we look at the DNA, I want to point to the idea that I personally believe if it was an intruder, or if it was the Ramseys themselves, whatever, I believe it's somebody that knew the Ramseys well, or at least had stalked them for a good amount of time. I believe it was somebody that knew them. And that's even some of the case that the Ramseys side of things have pointed to, some of the people that they had in their camp. It was somebody that had at least known them to an extent where they would have known the house, they would have known, the family to an extent. And that's one thing that always has stumped me, because when you look at who the police have already gotten DNA for, they did everybody at the White's party, it would appear, they did the nanny, they've done all these different people that were close to the family, and all of those people were cleared in terms of the DNA specifically. The Ramseys themselves were also cleared from the DNA. It's really interesting to then look at, okay, if the DNA doesn't match anyone close to the family, was it somebody that was stalking the family? Was it just some random person, or was it, the Ramseys themselves? There's a lot here that I think is really interesting. If the DNA could identify somebody, it would go a long way. And another part of this that I think people don't necessarily understand, even if the DNA is matched to somebody, it doesn't mean that person is guilty or even that they're going to go to jail, because there's so many innocent ways that touch DNA could, happen. It would really point to the idea that, okay, we can evaluate this person. Let's say somebody is matched to it. That person, one, live in Colorado or at least around Boulder. Two, do they have some sort of alibi? Like, were they bowling with somebody? Were they with a significant other? Do they have somebody that can clear them? That's a really important part of this. And so the DNA evidence could point to somebody and then could clear or not clear somebody. Because then if the DNA is matched to somebody and they are cleared, say they were at the same grocery store and this person touched a can and then JonBenét touched it and then touched maybe in herself, and that's how it spread. That's what the DNA is, I think, good for, is it can help direct what we should be looking at or what law enforcement should be looking at. If it matches to somebody and then they're cleared, that really points to then the idea that maybe it's the Ramseys. If not, if it's the other way, it could help with that. So the DNA, I think that even if it is a red herring, even if the DNA points to something else that is not relevant at all and is not the killer, it still could clarify what we're looking at. So that's my point of the DNA, is I think that, nearly 30 years later, the DNA is at the center of this case for a reason. there's nothing else that the police can do at this point to try and prove that the Ramseys are the guilty or that there was some sort of intruder. It's just we're too far away from the case. There's too much contamination. We've had some of the best detectives, in the world try to look at this case. They have either come to an opinion that they can't justify, like there's not enough evidence to put somebody on trial, and there's not enough evidence to say that this person did it, all that kind of stuff. Even with the grand jury, like, yes, they came to the idea that the Ramseys should have gone on trial, but I do believe even if they would have gone on trial, I don't think that the Ramseys would have been found guilty of killing their daughter. They might have been found guilty of something else, like the same idea like the Madeleine McCann case. People argue the parents should have gotten put in for neglect, whatever. I think they could have maybe gotten the Ramseys on some of those other, things, not exactly the murder of JonBenét, but that's the whole point of it, is that the DNA is a good thing depending on whatever side of the fence you're on. If you're on the Ramseys did it or you're not, it's good because it can clarify certain things if we get some DNA matches. So let me know what you guys think about the DNA. Do you think it points to an intruder? Do you think it doesn't? Do you think it's a red herring? Do you think it's the vital part of this case? Let me know what you guys think. And also, if you guys did enjoy the video, subscribe and like for more of this type of content. And I'll be doing the Madeleine McCann case next. I don't know how soon that one's going to be out. I am taking a lot more detailed approach with the Madeleine McCann case, and it's a very slow process. I'm going through Kate McCann's book at the moment. I wanted to do the opposite perspective of going from Kate McCann's book and then going to investigators on their side of things in their book. And I'm only about a quarter of the way because I'm taking very detailed notes on everything that Kate McCann says in her book. And yeah, so we'll see how that goes. I hope to get that out by the end of the year. I don't think that's going to be in the next month in October. I would look towards probably November, December for that. So I'll have a little bit more Ramsey content for you guys before we get to that case, just for the YouTube algorithm and stuff. But yeah, and I also just think that it's great to expand upon things that I only talked about in my documentary for maybe 10 to 20 minutes in a whole video that can be dedicated to itself. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.